Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Spiritual Edition. And today we're continuing our reading of Thiaoouba Prophecy, The Golden Planet by Michel Desmarquet. And the subtitle is A True Report by the Author Who Was Physically Abducted to Another Planet. Hmm. Okay, so this book was inspired by a podcast I did. I interviewed a person named Samuel Chong, who was very instrumental in getting this book translated to Chinese and published in Chinese. And apparently the Chinese version is very popular in China. Very interesting, eh? So anyways, I'll put the link of that podcast in the description box below. And in the meantime, you can check out our other podcast as well on our website. We have a dedicated, what do you call that, tab for a podcast, and I try to interview interesting people pretty regularly, so you can check those out. We also have a newsletter that we put out once a month, so you could sign up for that. It's free. In there, we have announcements of different things that we're doing, different things that are happening, as well as our book clubs. We have Wednesdays, we have our health book clubs, and Thursday we have our financial book clubs. So if you have any books that you want to recommend for the book club to read, whether it's spiritual books or health books or financial books, I'll put a link in the description box below and you can do that. You know, we like to read classic books that's been around for a while. They usually stand the test of time. And yeah, so it would be very interesting. And we put all our books that we've read in the past, as well as our podcast on our YouTube channel. So you can check out our YouTube channel there as well. And then if you are local in the Los Angeles area, or if you're traveling to Los Angeles, come visit us in person in our healing center. We use technologies based on Nikola Tesla's scalar wave research, which is the non-physical dimension, very interesting, uh, for holistic healings for animals, domestic cats and dogs, as well as humans. So you can check us out there. This technology that we use is not only for scalar, but also for physical healing. So there's a lot of testimonials that talks about the benefits of this particular technology. It uses light technology, sound technology, what else? Light and sound and color therapy for holistic healing to bring the body back to balance, right? Which is very important because we are totally out of balance. And if you find this format helpful, if you like what we do, you could support us by buy me a coffee or with our merch. And I appreciate that very much. And thank you for being here. Thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for being interested, and thank you for wanting to read. Not a lot of people like to read, but if you look at wealthy people, successful people, they are avid readers, at least the interviews that I've seen. They have a robust library, and they're reading all the time. So, yeah, reading makes you smarter. Anyways, but you still have to read with a grain of salt, right? All right, so let us get with it. Now, this is chapter 10, and I um the book itself doesn't have the numerical chapters. The numerical chapters is something that I've kind of did myself just for my own gratification. But anyways, we are moving right along, and I hope you're enjoying this book so far. Okay, let's do it. So this chapter is titled A Different Alien and My Former Selves. Okay, let's see. I want to make sure the camera is good. I think it looks all right. Okay, here we go. A period of time had elapsed. I had no idea how long, when instinctively I turned my head toward the left. I'm sure my mouth fell open and remained that way. One of the two people I had met earlier was coming towards us from the left, leading a person very odd in appearance by the shoulder. For a moment, I thought this person to be a red Indian chief, such as we see in films. I will try to describe him as best I can. He was a very small stature, perhaps 150 centimeters, but what was most striking about him was that he was as wide as he was tall, just like a square. His head was completely round and sat directly on his shoulders. What had at first sight brought to mind an Indian chief was his hair, which is more like feathers, colored yellow, red, and blue uh, rather than hair. His eyes were quite red, and his face was flattened, almost like a mongoloid face. He had no eyebrows, but lashes that were 4 times as long as mine. He had been given a robe like mine, although quite different in color. The limbs that extended beyond the robe were of the same light blue color as his face. His aura, silvery in places, shone brightly, and around his head was a strong halo of gold. The shower of color from the top of his head was much smaller than Tao's, rising only a few centimeters into the air. He was telepathically invited to take a seat about 10 paces to our left. Again, the central figure levitated towards the new arrival and placed his hand on his head, repeating the procedure I had experienced. When we were all seated, the great figure began to address us. He spoke in the language of Thiaoouba, and I was completely stunned at finding that I understood everything he said, as just as if he had spoken in my mother tongue. Seeing my agitation, Tao telepathized. Yes, Michelle, you have a new gift. It will be explained later. Archie, the Theora was saying, this is Michelle from the planet Earth. I welcome you to Theopa, Archie. May the spirit enlighten you. Hmm. I like that greeting. That's kind of nice. This may the spirit enlighten you. Okay, addressing me, he continued. Archie has come to visit us from planet X. I'm not allowed to reveal the name of this planet, nor the reason I have been forbidden to do so. And we thank him in the name of the Spirit and all the universe, just as we thank you, Michelle, for your willingness to collaborate with us in our mission. Archie has come in his Agora, which is a spacecraft. There's a footnote about that. A spacecraft of the planet X, which travels at speed slightly below the speed of light. So Archie has come in his Agora, which is a spacecraft, at our request, especially to meet you, Michelle. I wanted you to see with your own eyes and touch with your own hands an extra planetarian quite different from our own race. Archie inhabits a planet of the same category as Earth. Although it is very different in certain respects, these differences are essentially physical and have contributed over the course of time to the physical appearance of the people. We also wanted to show you several things, Michelle. Archie and his fellow beings are highly evolved with both technologically and spiritually, which might surprise you considering you will find his appearance abnormal, even monstrous. However, you can see by his aura that he is highly spiritual and good. We also wanted to show you by this experience that we can give you for a time the gift not only of seeing auras, but of understanding all languages, and that without recourse to telepathy. So that was it, I thought to myself. Yes, that was it, Thora replied. Now move closer, the two of you. Talk together, touch each other if you want to. In a word, make each other's acquaintance. I stood up and Archie did likewise. When he was upright, his hands almost touched the floor. Each had 5 fingers, like ours, but the fifth included 2 thumbs, one in the same position as ours and the other where our little fingers are. We approached each other and he held his arm out to me, the wrist forward and fist closed. He was smiling at me, revealing a set of straight, even teeth, just like ours, but green. I held my hand out in return, not knowing what else to do. and he addressed me in his own language, now perfectly comprehensible to me. Michel, I'm very pleased to meet you and would have liked to be welcoming you as a guest on my own planet. I thanked him warmly and filled with such emotion, began the sentence in French and finished it in English, which he likewise had no difficulty understanding. He continued, at the request of the great Theora, I have come to Thiaoouba from planet X, a planet that resembles yours in many ways. It is twice larger than Earth, with 15 billion inhabitants, but like Earth and other planets of the same category, it's a planet of sorrows. Our problems are much the same as yours. We have had two nuclear holocausts during our existence on our planet, and we have experienced dictatorships, crimes, epidemics, cataclysms, a monetary system, and all that is associated with it, religions, cults, and other things. However, 80 of our years ago, our year lasts 402 21-hour days. We initiated a reform. In fact, the reform was set in motion by a group of four people from a small village on the shores of one of our largest oceans. This group, comprising three men and one woman, preached peace, love, and freedom of expression. They traveled to the capital city of their country and requested an audience with the leaders. Their request was denied, for the regime was dictatorial and military. For 6 days and 5 nights, the four slept in front of the palace gates, eating nothing and drinking little water. Their perseverance attracted public attention, and by the sixth day, a crowd of 2,000 had gathered in front of the palace. With feeble voices, the four preached to the crowd of uniting in love to change the regime, until guards put an end to their sermon by shooting the four and threatening to shoot members of the crowd if they did not disperse. This they quickly did in genuine fear of the guards. Nevertheless, a seed had been sown in the minds of the people. On reflection, thousands of them came to realize that without a peaceful understanding, they were powerless, absolutely powerless. Word was passed around among the people, rich and poor, employer and employee, worker and foreman, and one day, 6 months later, the entire nation came to a standstill. What do you mean by came to a standstill? I asked. The nuclear power station shut down, transport systems halted, freeways were blocked, everything stopped. The farmers didn't deliver the produce, radio and television networks ceased transmitting, communication system shut down. The police were helpless in the face of such unity. For in a matter of hours, millions of people had joined the cease work. It seemed for that time that people had forgotten their hates, jealousies, differences of opinion as they united against injustice and tyranny. A police force and an army comprised human beings, and these human beings had relatives and friends among the crowd. It was no longer a question of killing four subversive individuals. Hundreds of thousands would have had to be killed just to liberate one power station. In the face of the people's determination, the police, the army, and the dictator were forced to capitulate. The only deaths to occur during this incident were the 23 fanatics who comprised the tyrant's personal guard. The soldiers were obliged to shoot them in order to reach him. Was he hanged? I asked. Archie smiled. Why, no, Michel. The people were through with violence. He was deported instead to a place where he could do no further harm. And in fact, their example inspired his reform. He found again the path of love and respect for individual liberty. He died eventually, repentant for all that he had done. Now that nation is the most successful on our planet. But as on yours, there are other nations under the domination of violent totalitarian regimes, and we are doing all in our power to help them. We know that all we do in this life is an apprenticeship, offering us the possibility of graduating to a superior existence and even freeing us forever from our physical bodies. You must know, too, that the planets are categorized and that it is possible for entire populations to immigrate to another when their planet is in danger. but no one can do so if the new planet is not of the same category. Being overpopulated ourselves and having highly advanced technology, we have visited your planet with a view to establish a settlement there. An idea we decided against since your degree of evolution would bring us more harm than good. I was not very flattered by this reflection, and my aura must have indicated as much to Archie. He smiled and continued, I'm sorry, Michelle, but I'm saying my piece without hypocrisy. We still visit Earth, but only as observers, interested in studying and learning from you, your errors. We never intervene because that is not our role. And we would never invade your planet, as this would be a backstep for us. You are not to be envied materially, technologically, or spiritually. Going back to our astral bodies, an astral body absolutely cannot change to a superior planet until sufficiently evolved. We are speaking, of course, of spiritual evolution and not technological. This evolution occurs thanks to the physical body. You have already learned of the 9 categories of planets. Ours are at the bottom of the scale that improves as it progresses right up as far as this planet. We, in our present physical bodies, can be permitted only 9 days stay here. According to universal law, on the 10th day, our physical bodies would die, and neither Tao nor the great Theora, within whose power it is to revive the dead, would be able to prevent or reverse the process. Nature has very inflexible rules with well established safeguards. But if I were to die here, perhaps my astral body could stay here, and I could be reincarnated as a baby on Theora. I was full of hope, forgetting for the moment the family I loved back on Earth. You don't understand, Michelle. Universal law would require that you be reincarnated on Earth. If you had not yet finished your time there, but it is possible that when you do die on Earth, when your moment has come, your astral body will reincarnate in a body on another, more advanced planet, a second or perhaps third category planet, or even this one, depending on your present degree of development. It's possible then to skip all categories and find ourselves reincarnated on a 9th category planet, I asked, still full of hope, for most decidedly I regarded Thiaoouba as a veritable paradise. Michelle, can you take some iron ore and some carbon, heat them to the right temperature, and produce pure steel? No. First, you must skim the rubbish from the iron, then it goes back to the pot to be processed again and again and again. For as long as it takes to produce first class steel, the same applies to us. We must be reprocessed over and over until we emerge perfect. For eventually we will rejoin the Spirit, who, being perfect himself, cannot accept the slightest imperfection. That seems so complicated. The Spirit, who has created everything, wanted it this way. And I'm sure that for him it's very simple. But for a poor human brain, I admit, it is at times difficult to comprehend. And it gets more difficult the closer we try. Oops, sorry. Oh, right. Sorry there. A little technical difficulty here for a minute. Okay, it's all right. Onward. Let's see. The closer we try to get to the source. For this reason, we have tried and in several places with success to abolish religions and sects. They apparently want to group people together and help them to worship God or gods and to understand better. And yet they make it all much more complicated and quite incomprehensible by introducing rituals and laws invented by priests who look to their own personal interest rather than following nature and universal law. I see by your aura that you already realize certain of these things. I smiled, for it was true, and asked, on your planet, can you see auras and read them? A few of us have learned to, myself included, but in this domain we are little more advanced than you. However, we study the subject enormously because we know this is what's necessary for our evolution. He stopped there quite suddenly, and I realized it was a telepathic order coming from the great personage that made him do so. I must go now, Michelle, and I must go now. Michelle and I will be completely happy to do so if in having spoken to you. Oh, okay. No, that's not right. Let me read that again. I must go now, Michelle, and I will be completely happy to do so if in having spoken to you, I have been able to assist you and your fellow creatures on Earth and across the universe. He held his hand out to me, and I did likewise. In spite of his ugliness, I would have liked to kiss him and hold him in my arms. I wish I had. I later learned that he had been killed along with five others when his spacecraft exploded just an hour after leaving Thiaoouba. I hoped that life would continue for him on a more hospitable planet, but perhaps he would return to his own in order to help his people. Who knows? I had met across the universe a brother who, like me, existed on a planet of sorrows, studying at the same school how one day to gain eternal happiness. When Archie had left the room with his mentor, I sat down again near Thal. The Theora who had given me the gift of understanding all languages addressed me again. Michelle, as thou had already told you, you were chosen by us to visit Thiaoouba, but the essential motive for our choice has not been revealed. It is not only because you have a mind already awakened and open, but also and principally because you are one of the rare sokus inhabiting Earth at this present time. A soku is an astral body that has lived 81 lives in human physical bodies, and that on different planets or different categories. For various reasons, the Sokus returned to live on inferior planets like Earth when they could just as well continue to climb the ladder without ever going backwards. You know that the number nine is the number of the universe. You are here in the city of nine dokos, founded on universal law. Your astral body has nine times nine lives, which brings you to the end of one of the great cycles. Once again, I was completely flabbergasted. I suspected I wasn't living my first life, especially after my journey to Mu, but 81 lives. I didn't know one lives so many. It's possible to live many more, Michelle, said the Theoba, interrupting my thoughts. Tao is up to her 216. But other entities live far fewer. As I said, you have been chosen from among very few Sokus living on Earth. But in order that you acquire a thorough understanding during the trip on our planet, we have planned another journey in time for you, so that you will better understand what reincarnation is and what its purpose is. We will permit you to visit your previous existences. This journey in time will be useful to you when writing your book, as you will fully comprehend its purpose. He had barely finished speaking when Tao took me by the shoulder and spun me around. She led me towards the relaxation chamber, a feature, it seemed, of each and every doko. The three theory followed us, still by levitation. Tao indicated that I should lie down on a large piece of fabric that was just like an air cushion. The chief Theora positioned himself behind my head, the other two each holding one of my hands. Tao cupped her hands above my solar plexus. The leader then placed the index fingers of both hands over my pineal gland, telepathically ordering me to stare at his fingers. Seconds later, I had the impression of sliding backwards at incredible speed through a dark, endless tunnel. Then abruptly, I emerged from the tunnel into what seemed to be a sorry, a little tongue twister there. Then abruptly, I emerged from the tunnel into what seemed to be a gallery of a coal mine. Several men wearing small lamps on their foreheads were pushing carts. Others, a little further away, were attacking the coals with picks or shoveling it into carts. I moved towards the end of the gallery where I was able to examine one of the miners closely. I seemed to know him. A voice that came from within me said, It's one of your physical bodies, Michel. The man was quite tall and well built. He was covered in sweat and coal dust and labored as he shoveled coal into a cart. The scene changed abruptly, just as it had when I was in the psychosphere on Moon. I learned that he was called Siegfried when one of the other miners at the entrance to the mine shaft calls his name in German, which I understood perfectly, but I do not speak or understand that language. The other miner asked Siegfried to follow him. He headed towards an old shed, somewhat larger than all the others in its apparent main street of the village. I followed them both inside, where oil lamps were burning and men sat at tables. Siegfried joined a group of them. They shouted something at a brute wearing, sorry, cotton mouth today. Okay, Siegfried joined a group of them. They shouted something at a brute wearing a dirty apron. And shortly afterwards, he brought them a bottle and some pewter goblets. Another scene was superimposed on this one. It seemed that it was several hours later. The shed was the same, but now Siegfried was staggering out, visibly drunk. His head towards a row of smaller he headed towards a row of smaller sheds, all of which had chimneys from which blackish smoke curled. Uh, brusquely, he opened the door of one of them and entered, with me hot on his heels. 8 children, progressing in ages from 1 year upwards, each 12 months apart, sat at a table, plunging their spoons into bowls full of unappetizing looking gruel. They all lifted their heads at a sudden appearance of their father, watching him with fearful eyes. A woman, medium in size but strong looking, with hair of a dirty blonde color, addressed him aggressively. Where have you been and where is the money? You know very well that the children haven't had beans in a fortnight, and yet again you're drunk. She rose and approached Siegfried. As she raised her hand to slap his face, he grabbed her arm and with his left fist punched her so hard that she was sent flying backwards. She fell to the floor, hitting the back of her neck on a chimney hearth as she did so, and was killed instantly. The children were crying and screaming. Siegfried leaned over his wife, whose wide open eyes stared lifelessly into his. Frida, Frida, come on, get up, he cried, his voice filled with anguish. He took her in his arms to help her, but she couldn't stand. Suddenly, as she continued to stare fixedly, he realized she was dead. Sobered now, he rushed towards the door and fled into the night, running on and on as if he had lost his mind. Again, the scene changed, and Siegfried appeared, firmly bound between two guards, one of whom was putting a hood over Siegfried's head. The executioner also wore one of the holes cut in it for his eyes. He was a huge man and held within his enormous hand the handle of a wide blade axe. The guard made Siegfried kneel, bending forward so that his head rested on the execution block. Now the executioner came forward and assumed his position. A priest hastily recited prayers as the executioner slowly raised his axe over his head. Quite suddenly, he let it fall on the neck of Siegfried. The victim's head rolled across the ground, causing the crowd to recoil several steps. I had just witnessed the violent death of one of my many physical bodies. The sensation was so strange. Until the moment of his death, I had been filled with a great fondness for this man, and although he had done wrong, I felt great pity for him. At the moment of his death, however, as his head rolled across the ground amid the murmurs of the crowd, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, on his account as well as my own. Immediately, I was presented with another scene. Before me was a lake, its shining blue waters reflecting the rays of two suns, which hung quite low on the horizon. A small boat, richly yet delicately decorated with sculptures and paintings, proceeded across the lake. It was guided by men of medium size and reddish complexion, using long poles which they plunged into the water. Beneath a type of canopy and seated on an ornately decorated throne was a lovely young woman with a golden skin. Her oval-shaped face was lit up by pretty almond eyes and long blonde hair that fell to her waist. She was relaxed and smiling as the young company which hovered around her entertained her lightheartedly. I knew instantly that this pretty creature was myself in another life. The boat proceeded steadily towards a landing pier, from which led a wide pathway bordered by tiny flowering shrubs. This path disappeared among trees that surrounded what appeared to be a palace, with roofs at various levels and of various colors. With a change of scene, I was transported inside the palace to find myself in a lavishly decorated room. One wall opened up onto a garden, a very orderly miniature garden of astonishing variety and color. Servants with reddish skin, dressed in bright green loincloths, busied themselves with serving 100 or so guests. These guests were of both sexes and all richly dressed. They had the same type of light golden skin color as the woman on the boat. In contrast to the complexions of the servants, these people had skins of the color that blonde women on earth can attain after numerous sun tanning sessions. The pretty young woman from the boat sat in what appeared to be the place of honor in a high back seat. Music, soft and enchanting, could be heard and seemed to emanate from the far end of the room as well as from the garden. One of the servants opened a large door to admit a tall young man, perhaps 190 centimeters in height and of similar golden complexion. His bearing, his bearing was proud and his build athletic. Copper blonde hair framed a face of regular features. He advanced with a purposeful stride towards the young woman and bowed before her. Whispering something to him, she gestured to the servants who brought forward an armchair similar to her own and placed it beside hers. The young man sat down and the woman gave him her hand, which he held in his. Suddenly, on a signal from her, a gong sounded several times and silence fell. The guests turned towards the couple. In a voice loud and clear, directed towards the servants as well as the guests, the young woman spoke. To all of you gathered here, I want you to know that I have chosen a companion. This is he, Zinolini, and he will have, from this moment and according to my agreement, all of the royal rights and privileges after me. Indeed, he will be the second power in the kingdom, after myself, the queen and the head. Any subject disobeying him or doing wrong by him in any way will answer to me. The first child that I bear, Zinolini, whether male or female, will be my successor. I, Labinola, queen of the land, have decided this. She signaled again, and the sound of the gong indicated the end of her speech. One by one, the guests bowed low before Labinola, kissing first her feet and then Zinolini's in gestures of subservience. This scene disappeared in a blur to be replaced by another in the same palace but another room, where the royal family sat in thrones. Here, Labinola was administering justice. All sorts of people paraded before the queen, and she listened attentively to them all. An extraordinary thing happened. I found I was able to enter into her body. It's quite difficult to explain, but for a considerable time while I listened, I watched and watched. I was Labinola. I could understand absolutely all that was said, and when Labinola pronounced her judgment, I was in total agreement with her decisions. I could hear in the murmuring of the crowd reflections of admiration of her wisdom. Never once did she turn towards Zinolini, and never did she ask his advice. I felt a great pride invade me, knowing that I had been this woman in another life, and I felt during this time the light tingling sensation that I was starting to recognize. Everything disappeared again, and then I was in the most luxurious of bedrooms. It proved to be that of Labinola, who lay completely naked on the bed. Three women and two men hovered nearby. As I approached, I could see her face, streaming with perspiration and disfigured with the pain of labor. The women, midwives, and the men, the most prominent doctors in the kingdom, seemed worried. The blood was, the child was arriving in a breech position, and Labinola had lost a lot of blood. This was her first child, and she was exhausted. Fear was evident in the eyes of the midwives and the doctors, and I knew that Labinola already realized she was going to die. The scene moved forwards 2 hours in time, and Labinola had just breathed her last breath. She had lost too much blood. The child, too, had died, suffocating before it could emerge into the world. Labinola, this pretty creature of 28 years, so beautiful and good, had just released her astral body, my astral body, to live another life. Further scenes were already appearing, revealing other lives on other planets, as men, women, and children. Twice I was a beggar, and 3 times a sailor. I was a water carrier in India, a goldsmith in Japan, where I lived till 95 years of age. A Roman soldier, a black child at Chat, devoured by a lion at the age of 8 years. An Indian fisherman on the Amazon, dead at 42 years, leaving 12 children. An Apache chief dead at 86 years, several times a peasant farmer on Earth as well as on other planets, and twice an ascetic in the mountains of Tibet and on another planet. Apart from apart from when I was Labinola, ruling queen of 1/3 of a planet, most of my lives were very modest. I saw scenes from all 80 of my previous lives, some of which impressed me a lot. I do not have time to detail them all in this book, as they would fill a volume on their own. Maybe one day I will write it. At the end of the show, I had the impression of moving backwards in the tunnel. And when I opened my eyes, Tao and the 3 Theori were smiling kindly. When it was established that I was indeed back in my present skin, the leader addressed me in the following words. We wanted to show you your past lives, that you might notice they vary as though they were attached to a wheel, because a wheel is made to turn. Any point on it that is on top will soon be at the bottom. It is inevitable, do you see? One day you are a beggar, and then you can be a queen, such as Labinola, who of course was not only at the top of the wheel, but also learned a lot and greatly helped others. And yet, in many cases, a beggar will learn as much as a king, and in some instances, he will learn much more. When you were an ascetic in the mountains, you assisted many more individuals than in most of your other lives. What counts most is not appearances, but what is behind them. When your astral body takes on another physical body, it is quite simply in order to learn more and even more. As we have explained to you, it is for the sake of your higher self. It is a process of continual refinement, which can occur just as effectively in the body of a beggar as in that of a king or a miner. The physical body is but a tool. The sculptor's chisel and hammer are tools. They will never reach beauty on their own, but they contribute to it in the hands of an artist. A wonderful statue could not have been created with the artist's bare hands. You should always bear in mind this main point. An astral body, in all cases, must conform to universal law. And by following nature as closely as possible, it can achieve the ultimate goal by the fastest path. With that, the theory resumed their places, and we resumed ours. During my stay in the doko, the sun had set. However, they didn't deem it necessary to explain the luminous ambience that allowed us to see at least 15 meters in distance inside the doko. My attention was still focused on the theory. They were looking at me with kindness, surrounded by a golden mist that became more and more dense, into which they disappeared, just as they had on my first visit. This time, Dao gently placed her hand on my shoulder and asked me to follow her. She led me towards the entrance of the doko, and in an instant we were outside. It was completely dark, and no light shone anywhere apart from over the entrance. I could see no more than 3 meters in front of me and wondered how we were going to find the flying platform. I then remembered that Tao could see as well by night as by day. I was curious to see evidence of this. Like a typical earthling, I sought proof. It was provided immediately. Tao lifted me up effortlessly and sat me on her shoulders, just as we on earth carry our little ones. You could stumble, she explained as we proceeded along the path, and indeed she seemed to know exactly where she was going, just as though it were daylight. Before long, she put me down on the seat of the lavatok and sat herself next to me. I placed my mask, which I had been holding in my hand, on my knees, and almost immediately we took off. I must say that in spite of my confidence in Tao, I felt uneasy at flying blind. We flew between the immense trees of the park, and I couldn't even see the stars that usually shone so brightly. Great clouds had formed after sundown, and our surroundings were completely obscured in darkness. Next to me, however, I could see Tao's aura and the bouquet at the top of her head, which was particularly bright. We picked up speed, and I'm sure we traveled as fast in the darkness as we did by day. I felt some drops of rain sting my face. Tao moved her hand towards a point on the machine, and I felt the rain no more. At the same instant, I had the impression that we were stopping, and I wondered what was happening, for I knew we were over the ocean. Occasionally, in the distance on our left, I could make out colored lights that moved. What is it? I asked Tao. The lights at the entrances to the dokos on the coast. I was trying to understand why the dokos were moving when suddenly, through the darkness, which seemed even thicker, a light came directly towards us and stopped beside us. We are at your place, said Tao. Come on. She lifted me again. I felt a slight pressure as when one enters a doko, and then felt the rain full on my face. The downpour was very strong, but in a few strides, Tao was under the light and we entered the doko. We got here just in time, I remarked. Why, for the rain? No, it's actually been pouring for a short while now. I activated the force field. Didn't you notice? You stopped feeling the wind, didn't you? Yes, but I thought we had stopped. I don't understand at all. Tao burst into laughter, which put me at ease again, and I suggested that the explanation to the mystery was about to unfold. The force field not only keeps the rain out, but also the wind. So you had no reference point by which to judge whether we moved or not. You see, one must not rely on perception. But how can you find this place in such darkness? As I told you, we can see as well as by night. We can see as well by night as by day. That's why we don't use lighting. I realize this is not convenient for you. You can't see me now, but in any case, we have had a very full day, and I think it would be best for you to rest now. Let me help you. She led me to the relaxation area, wishing me a good night. I asked her if she was going to stay with me, but she explained that she lived quite nearby, not even required not even requiring the vehicle to transport her there. With that, she left, and I stretched out and soon fell asleep. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of Tao's voice as she leaned over me, whispering in my ear. I observed, as I had the first time, that this relaxation area was well deserving of its name, for I would not have heard Tao had she not leaned over me to speak, sound being extremely muffled here. Further, I had slept soundly, waking without waking once. I was perfectly rested. I got up and followed Tao towards the pool. It was at this time that she told me of the accident that had befallen Archie. I was greatly saddened by the news, and tears sprang to my eyes. Tao reminded me that Archie was proceeding to another existence, and should be remembered as a friend who has left us to go elsewhere. Indeed, it is sad, but we must not be selfish, Michelle. Other adventures and other joys are probably in store for Archie. I washed, and when I rejoined Thal, we enjoyed a very light meal and drank some hydromel. I didn't feel hungry. Looking up, I could see the gray sky and the rain falling on the doko. It was interesting to watch as the raindrops didn't scream down sorry, wrong word. It was interesting to watch as the raindrops didn't stream down the doko as they would have done over a glass dome. Instead, they simply disappeared when they reached the Doko's force field. I looked at Dao and she smiled at me, having seen my surprise. The drops are dislocated by the force field, Michel. It is elementary physics, at least for us. But there are more interesting things to study, and unfortunately, you have so little time. There are still more things that I must teach you, so our fellow men might be enlightened when you write your book, such as the mystery of Christ, which I mentioned yesterday when we were interrupted by Arky's arrival. First, I must speak to you of Egypt and Israel, as well as of Atlantis, the famous continent so often talked of on Earth and the subject of so much controversy. Atlantis, like the continent of Mu, did not exist. Oh, sorry. Um, Atlantis, like the continent of Mu, did exist and was situated in the southern, in the northern hemisphere, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It was attached to Europe and linked to America by an isthmus and to Africa by another isthmus at about the latitude of the Canary Islands. This area was slightly greater than that of Australia. It was inhabited by the people of Mu approximately 30,000 years ago. In fact, it was a colony of Mu. There was also a white race there, tall blonde people with blue eyes. It was the Mayas, very lean colonizers from Mu, who governed the country, and they constructed there a replica of the Pyramid of Savanasa. 17,000 years ago, they explored the Mediterranean thoroughly, going via the north of Africa, where they acquainted the Arabs, descendants of the crossbreeding between yellow and black Baccaratinians, which with much new knowledge, material as well as physical, spiritual. The numerical script, for example, still used by the Arabs, came from the Atlantis and from Mu, of course. They went to Greece, where they founded a small colony, and the Greek alphabet corresponds almost exactly to that of Mu. Finally, they arrived in a land that the natives called Aranka, and which you know as Egypt. There, they established a strong colony with a great man by the name of Thoth at his head. Laws were established which embodied the beliefs of Mu and the organizational principles of Atlantis. Improved plants, new techniques for raising cattle, new methods of cultivation, pottery, and weaving were all introduced. Thoth was a great man of Atlantis, extremely knowledgeable materially as well as spiritually. He founded villages, built temples, and just before his death, he had constructed what you now call the Great Pyramid. Each time these great colonizers judged that the new colony had the potential to become great, materially and spiritually, they would construct a special pyramid, a tool, as you were able to see for yourself on Mu. In Egypt, they constructed the Great Pyramid on the same model as the Pyramid of Savanasa, but on a scale 3 times reduced. These pyramids are unique, and in order to fulfill their role as a tool, their dimensions and specifications must be precisely adhered to, as well as their orientation. Do you know how much time it took? It was quite fast, just 9 years, for Thoth and his master architects knew the secrets of anti-gravitation for Mu, and the secrets for cutting the rock and using let's just call them electro ultrasounds. But on Earth, the experts believe it to have been constructed by the pharaoh Cheops. It's not so, Michelle. Of course, this is not the only mistake that the experts on Earth have made. On the other hand, I can confirm that the pharaoh Cheops used this pyramid as it was meant to be used. The Maya Atlanteans were not the only ones to explore and colonize. Gone for thousands of years, the Nagas had colonized Burma, India, and finally they reached the shores of Egypt at about the latitude of the Tropic of Cancer. They too founded a successful colony and occupied Upper Egypt. Both groups of colonizers introduced similar sorts of improvements. The Nagas established a large town called Mayo on the banks of the Red Sea. The natives of the region went to their schools, gradually becoming assimilated with the colonists and producing the Egyptian race. However, about 5,000 years ago, the Nagas in the north of Egypt and the Maya Atlanteans began fighting for a reason that is quite ludicrous. The Atlanteans, whose religion differed significantly from the religion of Mu, believed in the reincarnation of the soul, astral body, in the country of its ancestors. Thus, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. Okay. Thus, they claim that the soul traveled westward to where they had come from. The Nagas held a similar belief, except that they claimed the soul went back to the east, since they had come from the east. For 2 years, they were actually at war over this difference, but it was not a terribly cruel war, as both groups comprised of fundamentally peace-loving people. And eventually, they became allied and formed a unified Egypt. The first king of United Egypt, both upper and lower, was called Mena. It was he who established the town of Memphis. He was elected by the same method used in Mu, a method that did not long survive in Egypt due to the rise of a powerful clergy, which little by little put the pharaohs under its thumb. This situation continued over the years, with notable exceptions among the pharaohs who yielded to the clergy. One such exception was the pharaoh Akhenaton, who was poisoned by the priests. Before dying, he made the following statement: "The time that I have spent on this earth was an era in which the simplicity of truth was not understood and was rejected by many." As often happens in religious sects, the Egyptian priests distorted the truth, simple though it was, in order to have a better hold over the people. They had them believing in the devil and in various divine beings as well as other such nonsense. It must also be said that prior to the war and the subsequent peace pact, which saw Mena installed as king of Egypt, the population, made up of Maya, Atlanteans, and Nagas in equal proportions, had established a sophisticated civilization in both Upper and Lower Egypt. The country was prosperous, farming and grazing flourished, and the time of the first king of Egypt, Mena, was almost the consecration of this rising civilization. Now, at this point, we must go back in time. Archie said that Earth is still being visited by extraterrestrials, and as you know, it has been regularly visited in the past. But I should elaborate on this. Earth is visited, as are many other inhabitable planets scattered throughout the universe. Sometimes the inhabitants of certain planets are obliged to evacuate as their planet is dying. Now, as Archie also explained, you cannot change planets as you might change houses. You must conform to a cycle that is well established. Otherwise, catastrophes can be the consequence. This is what happened 12,000 years ago. Human beings left the planet Hebra in order to visit the galaxy in search of a new planet of the same category as their own, for they knew that in the millennium to come, their planet would become totally uninhabitable. A spacecraft capable of extremely high speeds experienced serious problems during its reconnaissance flight and was obliged to land on your planet. It landed in the region of Krasnodar, a town in western Russia. Needless to say, at the time there was no town, no people, no Russia. On board the spacecraft were 8 astronauts, 3 women and 5 men. These people were approximately 170 meters in height, with black eyes, fair skin, and long brown hair. They made a successful landing and began repairs to their vessel. They found the gravitational force stronger than on their own planet and initially had some difficulty moving about. They established a camp near their spacecraft, expecting repairs to take some time. One day during work, an accident occurred, causing a terrific explosion that destroyed half of the vessel and killed 5 of the cosmonauts. The other 3, being some distance away, were unharmed. They were Robanon, a man, and Livia, Levia and Dina, 2 women. They knew well what was in store for them. Coming from a planet of superior category, they did not belong on Earth, where they were in fact prisoners, and thus they anticipated the misadventures that befell them. The accident came as no surprise. For several months, the three remained at the spot for the season was warm. They had some weapons and they were able to procure game. Their provisions of manna and ration having been lost in the explosion. Eventually, the cold arrived and they decided to move further south. The gravitational force made walking long distances extremely difficult for them, so that their treks south to warmer climates became a veritable road to Calvary. They passed by the Black Sea, heading in the direction of today's Israel. The journey took months, but they were young people, and astonishingly, they made it. The weather became more clement and even hot as they reached lower latitudes. They stopped by a river, establishing there a permanent camp, all the more permanent since Dinah was several months pregnant. At full term, she gave birth to a son whom they named Ranan. By then, Levia too was pregnant, and sometime later, she also bore a son, Rabion. These people from Hebron acclimatized in this spot, which was rich in game, honey, and edible plants, and there they founded their line. It was quite some time later that they made the acquaintance of some nomads passing by. This was their first contact with earthlings. The nomads numbered 10, and having found Robanon's women to their liking, they wanted to kill him and take all that he had, including the women. Robanan still had his weapon, and although a pacifist, he was obliged to use it and killed four of his attackers who fled in the face of such power. These people were greatly saddened that they had to resort to such a measure, and saw in it yet another sign that they were on a planet that was forbidden to them by universal law. I don't understand, I interrupted. I thought it wasn't possible to jump categories in a forward direction, but that it would be possible to go to inferior planets. No, Michel, neither forwards nor backwards. If you go forward, disregarding universal law, you will die. If you go backwards, you expose yourself to worse conditions because your advanced spirituality can't exist in a materialistic environment. If you like, I can give you an analogy in the form of a childish comparison. Imagine a man immaculately dressed in polished clothes or polished shoes, white socks, and pressed suit. You oblige this man to walk through a farmyard, 30 centimeters deep in mud. Further, you insist that he put his mud into a wheelbarrow with his hands. No need to ask what state he will be in when he was finished. Nonetheless, a group of extraterrestrials founded their line that became the ancestors of present-day Jews. The Bible was written later by scribes who retracted the history of these people, distorting it as legend became mixed with reality. I can affirm for you that the Adam of the Bible was not only not the first man on earth, far from it, but he was called Robanon, and he didn't have a wife called Eve, but two wives named Livia and Dinah. The race of Jews developed from these three without mixing with other races because by atavism they felt themselves superior, and indeed they were. However, I must assure you that the Bible is not the product of the scribe's imagination, nor is it embellished. There was much truth in it. I say was because in the various councils of the Roman Catholic Church, the Bible has been greatly revised for reasons which are clear to serve the needs of Christianity. This is why I said yesterday that religions are one of the curses of earth. I must also enlighten you in regard to several other biblical points. Shortly after the arrival of the Hebrews on earth, we helped them on several occasions. We also punished them. For example, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was caused by one of our space vehicles. The people of those two towns were presenting a bad example and acting dangerously for the people in contact with them. We tried various means in an endeavor to put them back on the right track, but in vain. We had to be ruthless. Each time that you read in the Bible, and the Lord God said this or that, you should read, and the inhabitants of Thiaoouba said. Why not save them in the beginning and take them back to their planet or to another of the same category? That is, of course, a reasonable question, Michelle, but there is a snag. We can't predict the future more than 100 years in advance. We thought at the time that being such a small group, they might not survive. And if they did, they would mix with other races and thus be absorbed by other peoples and rendered impure. We guessed that this would occur within a century, but such was not the case. Even now, as you know, the race is still almost as pure as it was 12,000 years ago. As I told you, by means of religious councils, priests erased or changed many things in the Bible, but others survive and can easily be explained. In chapter 18, verse 1, the scribe refers to our appearance as that time, saying, "The Lord God appeared unto him among the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the entrance to his tent in the heat of day." The scribe is speaking of Abraham in this chapter. 2. Abraham, looked up and saw three men standing by. When he saw them, he ran to them and fell to the ground before them. 3. And he said, "Lord and Master, if I have found grace in your eyes, I beg you not to go far from your servant." Abraham invites the three men to stay. The scribe refers to them as men 1 minute, and yet one of them is also called the Lord God. He speaks to them, and each time it is the one referred to as the Lord God who replies. Now, the priests of the Roman Catholic Church find this in formal contradiction with their views, as do many other religions, for they will tell you that no one can imagine the face of God, that one would be blinded by it. In a sense, they are right, since the Creator, being a pure spirit, has no face. According to the scribe, Abraham converses with the Lord God as he would a high-ranking Lord on earth. And the Lord God answers him and is accompanied by two other men. The scribe does not speak of angels. Isn't it odd that God comes down to earth in the form of a man, accompanied not by angels, but by men? Actually, there and in many other places in the Bible, it is easy for someone of good faith to see that God has never spoken to any human being. He could not have done so, since it is astral bodies which aspire towards him, and not God who leans towards them. That would be like a river flowing backwards. You have never seen a river flowing from the sea to the mountaintop, have you? A passage from the Bible, 2 pages further on from the one just mentioned, is also quite amusing. Chapter 19, verse 1. The two angels arrived in Sodom, and Lot was seated at the gates to Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to go and kiss the ground in front of them. Then he manages to get them to go to his house. And suddenly, in verse 5, they called Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who entered your house?" Now the scribe is referring to them as men. Next, in verse 10, the men reached out, made Lot come inside, and closed the door. 11. And they struck blind everyone at the entrance to the house, from the smallest to the largest person, so that it was useless for them to try to find the door. It is easy to see the lack of precision in this passage, where the scribe begins by speaking of two angels, then speaks of two men, and then describes two men striking people blind. According to the Bible, such a miracle requires at least an angel. There, my dear, is another good example of confusion in earthly scripts. The men were quite simply our men from Thiaoouba. Thus we guided and helped the Jews, for it would have been a shame to let a race so spiritually evolved sink back into ignorance and savagery, only because it had accidentally committed the error of coming to a planet which was not appropriate for it. We helped them in the centuries that followed, and it is this that certain scribes have tried to explain by writing the accounts that have formed the Bible. Often they were in good faith. At times they would distort the facts, although not purposely. The only times this distortion was purposely done, and for very specific reasons, as I have said, was by the Roman Catholic Church during the Council of Nicene in AD 325, Constantinople in AD 381, Ephesus in AD 431, and Chalcedony in AD 451. There were others too, but of lesser significance. The Bible is not the book of God, as many people on earth believe it to be. It is simply a document of ancient history, much modified and full of embellishments. added by writers different from the original scribes. For example, let's go back to Egypt and the time of the Exodus, which interests people on earth. I'm going to restore the truth concerning this for you and for others before going further. Let's go back then to Egypt, where we find that the descendants of the cosmonauts have become the Hebrew people, the name deriving from that of their planet Hebra. Since arriving accidentally on your planet, this race has experienced great difficulties. It experienced them then, and it experiences them still. As you know, the Jews are very intelligent by comparison with other races. They have a religion which is quite different, and they don't mix with other races. Marriages are almost always among their own kind. Because of inexorable universal law, they have always suffered persecution, much of which has occurred in recent times. As a result, their astral bodies were liberated and therefore able to proceed directly to more highly evolved planets where they belong. As you know, a group of Hebrews traveled with Joseph, son of Jacob, into Egypt, where they established a line, only to end up being hated by the Egyptians, and always for the same unstated reasons: their intelligence, and particularly their solidarity in the face of adversity. Action was needed. End of chapter 10. Wow, what an interesting story. Okay, well, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed that. We will continue our reading next week. And in the meantime, I hope you guys all have a great day, great night, great evening, wherever you guys are. And we'll see you next time. Okay, bye bye now.